we will start by loading in the file where we left off with from last week. So everyone, if you wouldn't mind, I'll go ahead. So the demo app file, wherever it exists. Right. So if you want to do things the kosher way, activate the environment that we set up first class. And then navigate to wherever the file is in your command line. And maybe if I could find it here. Oh, session 3. Okay, sorry. All right. You probably are not going to want to copy exactly what I'm doing, but just wherever that demo app.py file exists, go ahead. Run it. You should see eventually, you should see this kind of the confirmation that everything runs. All right, and then same thing, you'll get the URL right over here. Go ahead and run it. All right, and then we should have our first Dash application. And then here it'll say updating, which means it's just loading everything for the very, very first time. But presumably, once that's done, we should see our chart right up here. And then here we go. All right, so everything is well in the world. Okay, and so the big thing here, right, where we left off with previous class, you can choose, XYZ metric. All right, and then if it's cumulative, it shows everything for the entire time series. Okay, if it's not cumulative, all right, it just shows it for the most recent dates. And then we have an adjusted title right over here, right, which says it's just showing it for this particular day. Okay, so that's kind of the functional part of our dashboard. And then where we left off with everything, right, is we included in a callback. The idea then, if you click on a particular state, all right, you'll see this dictionary returned where you have, points right over here, curve number, things like that. And then the big thing over here is where location, and then it shows CA right over here like this. All right, so the important part, okay, is you can actually keep track of what section of the map is being clicked on, which is really useful because if you have callbacks that are triggered by clicking on something, then you need to filter your data set based off of whatever this value is right over here like that. Okay, and so we didn't really do anything with this right over here, but if you go to this section right over here, all right, the fact that you click right on California and then this thing updates right with values for California or for Texas or for wherever, all right, it's basically, the way it's basically done is that when you click on this particular state right over here, it just used the value locked up inside this dictionary right over here and then filters the data set and then just calculates a bunch of metrics, wherever the data set equals Oregon or Mississippi or Ohio or whatever. Okay. If we look at the actual source code, we can maybe see in a bit more detail how things are working here. This is, again, if you're not using this every single day, it can fall out of your memory pretty quickly. So we'll just do a quick recap over here, right? These are all of our imports. This is the actual application that we're initializing. This is the data set that we're loading in. We're only doing these things once, all right? Like we only initialize the app once, we only load in the data once, all right? And so app is literally just a container that contains our application. And so it's kind of this kind of complicated variable which stores different attributes about the actual program that we're running. The one that you spend the most time on is layout. This is where we actually define where everything is located, all right? And then these are just kind of the combination of our titles and then the different drop-down elements that we can go and choose from. And then finally, what we have over here is this is kind of where you actually make dashboards, is you have callbacks, okay? And then the callbacks are basically ways of defining output and input that come from the application itself that allow you to change data when a particular event happens. And this is pretty much what gives dashboards their snappiness. All right, so when we go ahead and then click on something like this, okay, what we're doing, all right, is we're triggering a callback. And so we're basically just kind of, basically transforming our data set and just capturing values for this particular column right over here, and then so on and so forth. Okay, so we added a callback end of class previously, render map chart, and then we're just going to keep on adding to this, and then there's going to be one more that's added here later on. Okay, so with that being said, questions?
Looking at the code, I kind of forget how things are connected.
That's fine. All right. Okay. So how are things connected? Is this particularly about the callbacks?
Yeah, like the function, the arguments, and then what they return, and then how that goes back into the inputs or the outputs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, that's good enough. That's my guess is everyone in the room probably had some question in the back of their mind that was fairly similar to that. Okay. So real quickly here. All right. So so any sort of callback, you always define output and input. Okay. And so the idea here, what you list as the input right over here, okay, this is defined by two things. Okay, so this part right over here where you have the input, all right, this item refers to whatever the ID is right over here.
Right.
Okay, so anytime you have some sort of, pretty much anything up here, okay, if you have the ID right over here, that's pretty much how you access it inside of a callback, okay? So in this case, our inputs, right, we look this right over here, right, there's the ID called dropdown.
Right.
Okay, and the dropdown is this thing.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, and now the idea then, what's also really important here, this part right over here is the parts of this input that you're going to be passing in. All right. So what's really important here, if you notice this where it says value. Okay, so basically this right over here refers to this right over here.
Right, right.
Okay, this is the idea then. Basically, anytime you choose a new option right over here, all right, really what that's doing, Devin, and everyone else, is it's changing what's being passed in to this argument right over here.
Right.
So essentially, where we say input, drop down, and then value, really what that amounts to, all right, is whatever's being selected inside this drop-down menu right over there.
Right.
Okay, so that's one of the inputs. All right, the second input is very, very similar. So what this thing is doing All right, there's this thing over here called cumulative. All right, that is just the check mark box right over here. Okay, same thing. Notice here, we are grabbing the value attribute right over here. And so that basically refers, again, it refers to this right over here.
Right.
Okay. All right. So essentially, whatever is being passed in for this argument right over here. Okay. And then notice how this one, with radio buttons, things are passed inside of a list. Okay. So the idea then, when this button is clicked, right, notice here it says the value is true, like this particular label like that. So the idea then, when this thing is clicked, right, the value of this input right over here is equal to this.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Just as an example here, we can add a second one. It's not really going to do anything, or this might break the callback itself, but okay. Let's just, again, this might cause things to stop working, but it can illustrate the point well enough. So let's do this. And then let's just do this. Hold on. All right, so we'll just kind of print this thing off so we can go ahead and see what it is. Real quickly here, the inputs to the function, drop-down val, cumulative val, click data, correspond in order to what the inputs are right over here.
Right. They could be called anything. It's just
they could be called
in order.
Yeah, just in order, right? So you can, you can use whatever you want. So the idea then, our drop-down label now is going to contain two potential items you could click on. All right, but let's just kind of go ahead. Let's restart this. By the way, I think I mentioned this last class. If you run debug mode on and then there are no problems, you should be able to auto reload things. So you wouldn't have to constantly like turn things off and then turn them back on. But on Windows, it's a little trickier to get that working. But real quickly here, this thing is the value of cumulative val. Right, it's true. And then the idea then, if you go ahead over here, all right, you click both of these, you will hopefully, okay, I hit enter, right? So that's literally now the value being passed into the callback.
Right.
So it essentially, kind of the take-home point is for each of these different inputs, they can pass in their data in different ways, you know, so you just need to be careful about how things are being like sent into you, okay? And then if we do something like this, if we unclick both of these, all right, what we're gonna get is an empty list.
Right.
Okay, so, all right, so the idea then, all right, so this thing right over here, which corresponds to this argument right over here, okay, is a list which contains collections of these things right over here. And then if nothing is there, then the whole thing is empty. Okay. All right. And then finally over here, this is since we have input main fig, right? That corresponds to this graph right over, like this thing right over here, main fig like that.
Yep.
All right. Now, in this case, instead of saying value right over here, we're saying click data. All right. And this basically is when you click on something inside this figure, what kind of information does it capture?
Right.
Okay. All right. Just in case we're clear here. Okay. What shows up on the bottom of the screen here when you click on the state? Literally all we're doing is we're just returning the value for click data right here. Okay, so you get the dictionary, and then what's important for us in this case is returning, we get to have this, because that tells us we clicked on the thing that corresponds to Arizona or Florida,
Right.
and so it's useful for filtering your data set. Okay, so that's the inputs, and then like was said before, right? After the callback, you have this thing over here, render map chart, and then you have to have an argument for every single callback, or every single input, excuse me, every single input that you have. Input here, input here, input here, right? They correspond like that. These are just variable assignments, so you can call these whatever you want. Like it really doesn't really matter. They just correspond to each one of these, all right? And so essentially here, so the inputs into this function, render map chart, are basically look something like this. This is just kind of, like if the value in the drop-down box were positive increase, right? The first argument would be read in like this. If the value, right, for cumulative were checked, right, cumulative value would look like this. And then right, would be, you know, whatever that big dictionary is right over here. And then essentially you just write a Python function that just does what you want with these values. Most of the time what you're doing is you're filtering your data set based off of, you know, whatever sorts of choices are done over here. Like almost all the callbacks, actually not almost all the callbacks that are built for this dashboard is you're just filtering data in different ways depending on what's chosen over here. You know, so you get the hospitalization increase, or, you know, the column, right, for hospitalizations or cases or deaths. You get the total value or the most recent date, depending on whether or not this was clicked. And then what we're going to do over here is we're going to take the data that's sort of accessed and the click, and then use it to create a table. We haven't done that yet, but that's what we're going to do. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So, okay. All right. So hopefully this is kind of helping, kind of stimulating the memory a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
I remember.
Doing okay? We'll talk about outputs here in a minute.
Yep.
But that's okay. All right. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right. So what's going to come next? All right. So you have inputs right over here. You also have outputs. You can define a callback to basically have as many outputs and inputs as you'd like. All right. And generally in this case, the more interactive your chart is, kind of the more elaborate combination of these things you're going to have. All right. So what we're doing over here, we are defining, okay, 3 separate outputs. All right. And so it's the same thing right over here. This is the ID. Okay. So one of the outputs, main fig, is this one. And so the idea is here, you're taking this value as input. Here, what you're doing is we are adjusting the value for this argument as the output right over here. Okay, so in this case, main fig is the chart. Okay, this thing right over here is the picture of the United States. Okay, and the basic idea here is anytime you make a chart in Dash, right, you have dcc.graph, you have the ID. If this were not inside of a callback, it would look something like this, figure. And then, you know, fig might be something like, data is equal to whatever, you know, and then we have all the different arguments right over here. So like if this were a static chart, we would just display it this way, right? We'd have the graph thing right over here. And then the figure argument, we would pass in whatever it is that we were doing to make our chart. Okay, now the idea is we don't want the chart to be static. So what we're doing instead is you leave this blank, and that's what you pass into the callback. Okay, one thing that's probably important to note, okay. All right, the things we're adjusting as output, right, which is the H6 right over here, the graph right over here, and then the div right over here. These values right over here, they're not explicitly defined. All right, this is actually an important way for how these callbacks work, right? Because if it were static, we'd have something like this, you know, figure, excuse me, children is equal to something. If it were a graph, we would have figure is equal to something, and then this. All right, it would be, yeah, same thing right over here, children, okay. And that way these things would never change, but the idea is we're adjusting these values depending on what's happening inside the callback. Okay, so that's why we're leaving them out, because if you want to adjust it via callback, you just leave that blank. So that way Dash can set it for us. Okay, for anyone new to your previous week, Elise had the issue where her chart was not adjusting at all. So she was changing things, but nothing was being updated. And the reason why is because she'd actually defined the chart up here, and then she was doing something like this. All right, and so because this was basically hard-coded, it was overriding anything that was happening inside the callback. All right, so that's why I leave this empty. All right, I'll get rid of this. Now the idea then, all right, so every single input has to be represented as a variable here. All right, every single output that you have has to be represented by something that's returned from the function. Okay. All right, and so doing that, you basically kind of configure these self-adjusting input-output functions that change parts of the application depending on whatever the input values change. Yeah, Rashad?
Question, in the return or in the output thing, the variable names again have to be in order, right? Of whatever the output.
Yes, yes, exactly. So whatever's listed over here has to correspond to what you actually have put right over here like this.
Okay.
Okay. All right. That was probably a useful refresher. Yeah, this is, for whatever it's worth, if you were to work as a front-end web developer, this is kind of like the application framework you use to develop user interactions. Like if you're making a to-do list, or like, if you're adding or subtracting something from like some menu or things like that, you use JavaScript to do this stuff. So in the way that maybe something like Pandas or NumPy is like Python icing on top of a C++ cake, Dash is sort of like Python icing on top of a JavaScript cake, and so we're just using the Python interpreter to access a different programming language which does different things, which is why it seems kind of weird. So it's a little bit of a Frankenstein configuration, because like the top 5% is Python, the bottom 95% is JavaScript. Okay. Shall we continue, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll take that as a yes, an enthusiastic yes. Okay, great, awesome. All right, everyone, so let's go ahead. Let's kind of walk through. The lab is just going to be adding in different sort of aspects of our callbacks. Let's just kind of do the first couple of steps together just to make sure we have the hang of it, all right? So we're officially doing the first part of today's lab. So what we're going to do here, I'll post this in the chat if anyone wants to take a look at it. All right, so if you want to go here, and then the idea is, right, so this table right over here adjusts itself, based off of this callback value. Okay, so right, if you click on Kentucky, you'll get these values for Kentucky. If you click on Wyoming, you get these values for Wyoming, so on and so forth. So basically, part one of the lab is just kind of building this thing out. So this is a table that you build in Plotly. And then the table is linked to a callback that looks for changes in the click data inside the state. Okay. There's no hard and fast rule for how many callbacks you can create. All right. So what we're going to do here, we'll just kind of build out a simple table. And we'll just kind of add this bit by bit. All right. So you don't need to have one callback. You can have as many as you would like, all right? So the idea then, what we're going to do, here is we added the click data in here just as a kind of a simple demonstration, just to kind of demonstrate the way that works. We're actually going to put this into a separate function, all right? Because the idea is, This thing right over here is one callback. Okay, that kind of controls what shows up over here. What shows up over here is a separate callback over here. Okay, so these are actually two separate functions. So we'll go ahead and create that now. All right, so what we can do here, we do not need click data as input for this function. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Likewise, we also don't need the table div as output either. So let's get rid of this. All right. Alrighty, and then same thing. We don't really need this. All right, so now we have two inputs, two outputs. Let's just get this right over here. Okay, only two inputs into the function, and then only two things getting returned right over here. So this looks good. Let's save. And then now let's go ahead. Let's create a separate callback, which is designed for the table. So let's do this, app, callback, okay, output. So same thing, let's do this, table div. Alrighty, and then let's do this, yeah, let's define children. By the way, most of the time, your outputs, I think I've said it a few times, are probably either going to be figure. So if you're updating a chart, it's going to be figure. If you're updating a non-chart, like something that's displayed in a title or something along those lines or text, you're probably going to be updating the children value. Okay, those are usually the things that just sort of like store whatever is going to be displayed by something. So we'll do over here, right? So the output, right, is going to be this table div children. All right. Output only has to be listed inside of a list. Okay, if you have multiple outputs, but there's just one right over here, so we'll just list it like that. Input always has to be put inside of a list. Don't ask me why that is. It's just like that. All right. So same thing for the input. The idea here is we want to have whatever is clicked inside this chart. Okay. So main fig. All right. And then the argument that controls the click data is just called click data right over here. All right. And so now we have to write a function. We'll call it display table. All right. And because we have one input right over here, we have to define an argument. Right. The JSON right over here at the very top, we should have import JSON. And then the idea is that we're just taking this dictionary and then just pretty much rendering it inside the browser like this. Okay. So this is literally exactly what we had before, except this time it is listed inside of a new callback. All right. So let's save.
And the reason we have click data is just because that the chloropleth graph happens to like return this.
Basically, Devin, almost any chart in Plotly is going to return click data.
Oh, okay.
So basically, the idea is each unique mark contains information about it. So in this case, we click on the state, right? And that returns, for us, it basically returns the name of the state. But if you had a bar chart, you could actually, so if you clicked on a bar, you could get the click data for that as well.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. Or, any number of things, so. Yeah, so every single chart, as far as I know, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure every single chart that I know of renders click data in Dash. So the idea is you can kind of click on circles or bars or states or whatever, and then use that to trigger something else. I know, like, if you've ever used Tableau or something like that, this is pretty popular because that way, if you click on something inside of a chart, you can trigger some other event to go ahead and take place. So it's pretty handy for dashboards. Okay, good. All right. So are we in a good spot, everyone? Let's go ahead. If we're in good shape here, let's find the terminal that actually corresponds to the application that's running. Okay. Let's just rerun it right over here. All right, let's restart this thing. We probably don't need this second thing right over here. That's going to be unnecessary. All right, but now what we should have, right? It's kind of trivial. It doesn't really do much, but we just kind of took the part of the one callback and shifted it into its own separate function, which will be useful for what we're going to do next. All right, so everyone let me know if you're on the same spot that I am. And then if you're in good shape, we'll continue on.
Yeah.
Okay, great, beautiful.
Yep.
All right, awesome. Rishab?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, awesome, great, everyone. All right, so by the way, everyone, so you know, I'm going to go ahead. We don't really need this second thing right over here, so let's just kind of do away with it. All right. Okay, so we have this right over here. It's done. All right, and so now what we'll do here, so basically we'll go ahead and configure our table that we want to have. All right, so let's do this. I actually don't remember here. What I'm going to do over here is I'm going to go ahead and just start a notebook. I am doing this inside the same location where I have the file running. All right, so this is just to make it a little bit easier to display a few things. And then I'll be honest, I don't have the code for making a table committed to memory here. Let's go ahead. I will paste this into the Slack channel. All right. All right, so everyone here, this is probably not going to render correctly, but let's just, if you would, take this and let's just kind of put it into a notebook so we can take a look at it. All right, so the idea is we just want this actually, hold on, excuse me, everyone. Okay, go.table, and then let's just do something like this. We'll kind of, what we're going to do, let's just kind of get the hang of the basic layout of this thing. All right, because, you know, all these charts are kind of picky for how they take, you know, input data, things like that. Okay. All right, and so what's probably going to be important for us, okay, a lot of these things, right, don't really matter too much. So this is just, you know, what kind of color you want the table to be or the alignment and all that jazz, okay. What's probably useful, okay, to go ahead and take a look at. Okay, sorry, I'm aligning things here. All right, so if we do this, let's just add in some numbers. All right, so what we can do over here, let's render this thing. It doesn't actually look very good. All right, that's not very exciting. So there's something here, something that I missed. Ah, all right. Okay, here we go. All right, this is probably more according to what we want. This is an actual table. All right, let's just take a look. We'll kind of explain this here in a bit more detail. But again, let's kind of stop and just see if your screen matches mine.
Do you paste that code?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no worries. That's fine. Okay, so once you have this, right, you can just kind of riff on this a little bit.
What was the missing piece that you had to add?
So the thing is, so go.table literally just kind of returned a dictionary. You have to wrap this up inside the figure.
Ah.
Okay. Okay, I'm pretty sure there's a Plotly Express version of this, which is px.table. Just, I think for some reason, though, in order to get it render a particular way in the chart, we use the graph objects instead. All right, it doesn't really matter too much. As long as we have something like this, and then we have a super simple version of a table, then we should be good. Okay. So again, let's do another double check. Just see if people here are having what I'm having.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So good. Good. All right. So what's going to happen next then? So the idea here, when it comes to the table, right, what we should probably care about, right? Notice over here, okay, we're defining values for the header. Okay, and we're defining values for the cells, okay, right over here. And so that's really what this is doing, right? So this thing go.table is basically taking, this is called dict, you know, but basically it might be useful if we copy and paste this thing where it says dict like this. I actually find this nomenclature a little bit weird. But that's basically what we're passing into the header argument. Okay, and then in the cells argument, we're basically passing in that. Okay, and so this is what's being specified for this table right over here. Okay. What's probably useful to pay attention to, okay, so these things are just stylistic, right? You could remove them and everything would work just the same way. It wouldn't really matter too much. Ditto here, right, for the fill color and the alignment, you know. In some ways, you don't have to care about that too much. What's probably useful here, though, is this thing, okay? So notice right over here, we have, right, a list with 2 values. And that corresponds to what shows up in the header over here, right? So we have metric and value right over here. And this, so for example, if we did this, okay, this would cause 3 columns, right, to go ahead and create. I don't know if this will render correctly, but we can give it a shot. Okay, yeah, so this creates a column, right, with nothing inside of it whatsoever. Okay, now the idea then, all right, this, what we have over here, we have a list that contains the values for each of the individual columns. Okay, so if we look over here, right, this is pretty much the values for the first column. These are the values for the second column. And if we did something like this, all right, that would fill in the table right over there. Okay, so to maybe make this a bit more concrete, let's load in an actual data set and just do kind of a simple table, okay, to get something to go ahead and populate. So let's go ahead. Let's just copy and paste the URL. This should be in the demo app file. Let's remember to import pandas. Okay, so what we have here, so let's try something, all right? Let's do metric value. Let's get a table that looks somewhat similar to what we actually have in the table itself. We don't really need this third column, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so the idea then, right, if we look at sort of the final table we'll be building, right, one column is just the name of the metrics that we have right over here. The second column is the actual corresponding value right over here. All right, so let's do something like this. And then here, instead of 6 and 8, what we can do here okay, positive increase and death increase. So what we'll do here, right, instead of having 6 and 8, we'll have like that. So this is the same thing, except in having the number 6 and 8, we have the value that's getting returned by this right over here. So let's go ahead. Let's get a syntax error because I think I forgot my second bracket right over here. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, and so if you look at this, this table is actually not really all that different in substance from what we have in the final thing that we're doing right over here. Okay. So now basically, we're going to take these sorts of calculations right over here and then just chain them together and actually sort of tie them to the callback. All right, so let's, same thing. Let's just kind of do a quick heat check and sort of make sure we have a table looking sort of like this. And then this is more or less what we're going to return inside of our callback, except we're going to filter these values based off the state. And, you know, we'll add any number of different metrics. Okay. Amigos, amigas, how are we doing?
Good.
Okay, beautiful. All right. So let's go ahead to our existing callback. If we go over to demo app right over here. So let's try this. All right, so what's really important here, right? If we look, so when you actually click on click data, all right, we're getting a dictionary. There's a key here called points. The value is the list. And then inside the list is another dictionary. And then inside the dictionary is the key called location, and that returns what we want. Okay, so the idea here, what we really actually want here, right, is to be able to select this value. So the way we'll do it right? We want to grab the points key, right? This returns a list. So we want to grab the first item from the list. Okay, and then this returns a dictionary right over here, right? And so we want to grab the location key. Like that. Okay, so essentially, this value is going to take whatever dictionary is getting returned, right, from the click data value. And this is just going to ahead and get us whatever actual state that was clicked. All right, so now what we're going to do here is based off of this, we can go ahead and create a query. So it's something like this. Like this right over here. And then okay, we can go ahead, return a filter like this. And then, see, I think it's df, not data, sorry. Okay, we're good over here. Okay, all right. And so what we can do here, all right, so what we can do over here is we'll have so we're grabbing the state that's being clicked. We're saying filter the data frame based off of that state. And that's going to be returned in this variable right over here, which is filter data. All right, and now the idea then, let's just try something like this. I forget, again, I'll just take this. So let's just copy this, right? We don't have to think too hard about it. So let's save this right over here. All right, so what we're going to do here, okay, we'll have the first row be state. We'll have the second row be total cases. And then the corresponding value will be the current state. All right, and then what we'll do over here is we can change this to filter data. Positive increase. And then we'll just take the total value like this. So this is just pretty much is going to be a table, right, with, it'll have 3 rows total, right? So I have a column called metric and value. It'll have a row where one value is called state. It'll list the current state. And then another row where it'll say total cases, and then it will list right over here the value for the total number of cases for that particular state. And then we have our styling right over here. And so the idea then, this is going to be an actual table. So what I want us to do over here, so this is a graph, right, that displays this. We want to change this one over here. Let's do this. So DCC graph. Like if you just want to display normal text, you can do a div. All right. Let's change this to make it maybe a bit more, it's called table, that's fine. And so same thing, right? If you want to update the value of a chart, you want to basically change the figure value right over here. So we'll change this. Like that. And let's just run this and see if it works, okay? And then we also have to return the figure. Okay, so let's do that. Ooh, all right, so let's rerun. Let's rerun our application. Someone sounds like they're killing their keyboard.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. No, it's fine. Just kind of just a comment. It sounds like you're focusing very hard, Devin.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad you're paying such close attention. So you're tuned in. So that's great. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. Reset. And then the idea is, notice here, if you're in debug mode, it'll tell you if you're getting an error message. Okay. All right. We can actually do away with that. That's not a problem. Actually, that should be okay. Okay. So we have an empty chart right over here. Let's try clicking on something. Okay, hold on one second here. By the way, so one of the benefits of being in debug mode is that literally errors will pop up here in the console as they show. So in this right over here, so when I click on this, we get this update. And so basically, it's telling us here, right? The error that we're getting is name go is not defined. So the problem here is we need to go back. That's what we forgot to do over here. All right, so let's do that. Maybe you caught that. So if that's your case, you can just continue on. And so same thing. All right, and then let's give this one more shot. So the idea is, right, if we click on Texas, there we go. Okay, beautiful, right? So now we have our table and our number of cases. Okay. Let's give it a moment. I'll feel free, if you don't mind, just let me know when you're in the appropriate spot. But what you should have, right, is a working callback. And so you click on the state and you get any number of different values. All right. If you need anything, if you need to look at this or you need something copied and pasted, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But I'll just wait for everyone to get situated and make sure we are in an okay spot.
I think I'm good.
Okay, Rashab is good.
Could you copy and paste the code?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll just put the entire callback, okay, if you want to take a look at it.
Okay, thanks.
You're quite welcome, Shella. Yeah, it can be difficult to kind of get caught in the weeds, with getting these things to update correctly. All right, take a moment. We'll probably go into a section of the lab where we'll probably take, about a half hour or so trying to add some additional details to this. But probably if you can kind of look at this and then grok what's happening and why, that's actually probably the most important part of programmatic logic. Everything else is just adding some additional detail to this. All right. All right. Questions, anyone?
Could I see your code again?
Yeah, sure. Of course. If you want to, I can just see about attaching the entire file if that's possible.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem. In fact, I'll attach it to Slack if you want to just go ahead and just, Or I'll paste the whole thing. Hold on. Yeah, because it can be tricky getting to. One of the actual difficult parts about this sort of program, there's actually it's called Callback Hell, and so you kind of get stuck with kind of like this Rube Goldberg machine of like kind of different inputs and outputs, that are just constantly like recycling each other, and so
Yeah.
And so when you have a dashboard, where people can click on like 4 or 5 different things and fire off some sort of event, that means you have some collection, of like anywhere from like 4 to 5 inputs and outputs. And so, it can actually end up getting kind of complicated. So I'll be honest, in terms of actually, there's a reason why people like Python is because it actually avoids things like this. It's maybe more enjoyable just to. All right, so I think this is embedded code. Let me just, Devin, I think.
Yeah, if you do 3 ticks at the beginning, it'll put it in code.
All right.
Yeah. Oh. I guess you have to paste it in that little thing. I think you do the 3 ticks and then you paste.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to try.
Oh, yeah.
That works. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And again, the callback at the bottom, the one that says display table, is kind of the important one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the idea is the output is to a DCC graph, and we're updating the figure. That's always going to be the same if you're changing a chart. The input, right, is the other chart and the click data. That's being passed in the argument right over here. This variable just represents the value of the state that was being clicked on. This, right, is just filtering the master data frame according to the value of the current state. And we're returning that right over here. And then what we're doing now is we are creating a table. This table is really just copied and pasted from our Jupyter notebook. And so the big thing is here, right? We have a row called state, a row called total cases, and then we're passing in the value of the states, and then the summation of the values right over here, and then we're returning the figure to this thing right over there. Okay. So again, we should have where we need to be, right, is the we have a chart with the map of the US, and then we can click on these different states and then see this table populate on the bottom.
Is the error coming from the fact that if you don't have anything clicked, it returns null or something?
Yeah, so by the way, yeah, so sometimes when you fire something up in the very, very beginning, literally the value for the callback is nothing. So, which is why this first one right over here that happens, it basically happens on page refresh because the value of click data is none.
Right.
Okay. For whatever it's worth in the lab, it's going to ask you to rectify that. It's not a huge deal, but what this means is if you were to refresh this, this chart on the bottom over here is just going to be an empty graph because literally there's nothing to return.
Right, right.
And so it's kind of a small detail, but usually at the very top of your callback, this is the final version of it. You have this thing right over here. Right. And so this is basically creating the chart for the entire United States.
Gotcha.
And then, you know, if it's not, then you filter based off the state and then return stuff.
Cool.
Yeah. So this doesn't really, for the time being, this is pretty harmless. And again, once you click on something, then the state will populate and then you're good to go.
Is there a way to tell it don't display this chart at all unless there's data?
Yeah, essentially, if you would do that, like don't display it at all, you would basically adjust the style All right, and then just tell it literally. So the idea here is there's an attribute over here called style, like this.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dictionary. All right, and then there's an attribute called display, and you can set that to none.
I see.
So essentially, in fact, I think there might be a shortcut for that as well, if I'm not mistaken. But so kind of generically how this would work, Devin, and then maybe during the lab I can give you a more concrete answer. Right, so you'd always want to update the figure right over here. But basically, if you want to selectively make it disappear, right, if there's nothing there at all, it would sort of look like this. Okay, and this is a dictionary that you pass in. So like if you wanted to update like the pixel value or whatever, or like the background color or something, you could adjust all that right over here. And so essentially, kind of the way it would work here, in fact, I got to the wrong one. Let me add it, yeah, right over here, right? So the input, I'm actually in the wrong one here. Hold on, sorry. All right, so yeah, more or less how it would work here, Devin. Right, something like this for style, and then essentially it might be something like this. Right, so basically if there's nothing here at all, like that.
Right.
And then like this, you could do something like this, stale. I think you get the basic idea, And I think in this case, you could just do something like this, true, or something like that. It's something along these lines. And then what you would do then, you would still construct the figure, but then you just do this like that. And so that way,
yep.
If there was nothing there at all, then you would just sort of change the styling to make sure it didn't show up either at all.
Gotcha.
That's more or less what works, yeah. But basically, if you follow the letter of the lab, basically, what you'll do then is, so if this, right, is none right over here, instead of filtering based off the states, you're just going to sort of pass in the entire data set and get the value of positive increase or whatever it is that you want to do.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then you just display the values for the entire US. So that way, when you load the page, something will be there. But yeah, you can do it to your own tastes. All right, other questions? Okay, so what we're going to do here, this will be a good time to kind of take a break and then work on the lab for a little bit. So take a look. If we open this thing up, okay, we have gone through portions of part 1. Okay, so when we created the separate callback, we basically did step 1. Okay. All right, we did a portion of step 2 where we kind of created the separate table. All right, we've sort of gone through steps 1 through 3. All right, and then the idea here is just kind of go ahead and then work through steps 4 and 5. Part of this was what we just kind of asked about, right? So when the page first loads, and so there is no click data, right? Adjusting so that way it shows values for the entire United States. Okay. And then step 3, we just kind of started this. Okay. But essentially, step 3 is basically for your table, add in some combination of the different metrics. So we have kind of the cumulative value, the total number of cases and things like that. But, if you want to add more, go ahead and feel free. The one thing also that you want to go ahead and add in, this was kind of mixed in a little bit between steps 2 and 3, right, is in the existing kind of dashboard in its final state, right, if you have cumulative checked, it'll return all the values. But if you don't, it basically shows the values for the most recent day right over here. Okay, so the idea then is what you would want to have set up, right? So you have outputs right over here, right? Table val, figure, table. Actually, we don't need this. Let's get rid of this for now. Okay, but what we would want to do, right, is the same thing. We're going to use the value for cumulative, if you remember, is the it's going to look either like this or just be the empty list like that right over here. Okay, it would be one of those two things. And so then the basic idea then, right, so for the input, okay, add this in right over here. And so essentially, the idea then is for this table that you'll be creating. Again, the basic logic is more or less already there. You just have to add to it. So the idea then is basically if someone chooses a cumulative value, return the data for the entire time series. If it's not cumulative, just return it for the most recent date. Okay. And so you would just need to add some conditional logic to go ahead and update the values, and then at the very end, update your figure. Okay. Questions, anyone?
No.
Okay. All right. So let's take a break, and then let's just take a total of about 30 to 40 minutes. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. Okay. So walk through that. So the idea is when you're done to some extent, okay, you should have the ability to check and uncheck this thing right over here. And then when you click on this, right, it'll basically be updated here inside this lower table like that. All right. And however far you get, that should be good enough. And then we'll kind of add the slider at the we'll wrap things up by adding this thing right over here. And same thing, add that into some of the callbacks, and then we'll be done. All right, beautiful, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get off my screen. So hopefully, right, you just, again, it doesn't really worry if you have something that's matches exactly what is there. As long as it's functionally close enough, it should be good. Again, the basic callback logic didn't really change too much. It's just kind of adding in different items here. I can go ahead and post this in the Slack if you want to, but sort of I'll go ahead, share the screen. Actually, can you already see my screen? Sorry, am I presenting?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. All right. So the idea, again, there are a few different ways to do this, but basically, if you look at kind of what you want the final results to be, so the idea then, right, if you reload the application, ideally what you want is something to show up for all of the US, okay? So just to kind of prevent like some big, like empty looking chart right over here. So we have a table like that, all right? And then also the idea here is it's specific to whether or not things are cumulative or not. So if we uncheck this right over here, okay, we would sort of get the total values. And then if you click on any of the individual states, okay, you get the value for Texas over here. So we have total deaths, total cases, total tests, all that kind of jazz, right? But then if you change this to cumulative, okay, we get the total values right over here. And so then you can just kind of do this throughout, and just kind of click throughout the chart here. So in any event, the basic idea here, okay, and again, there are a few different ways you could have done this. So first thing I do here is basically check to see if click data is none, okay? And then I did something similar to this in the final file if you look through this. But effectively, basically creating this variable here, right, called vals for table. This variable right over here, essentially just stores all the values that you'd see over here on the right-hand side like this, okay? These things are never, ever, ever going to change. They're always going to be the same, but these ones right over here are going to be a little bit different. So pretty much just creating a different variable here that with a list of all the corresponding values, because if you want to go ahead and then refresh your memory, right, the way like a table here inside Plotly stores data, right, is you basically have a list that contains values for each of your columns, right? So this is going to be static, but this one is going to be dynamic. And so pretty much we're just creating a variable that changes and recalculates things depending on what was chosen. So, right, so the idea then is if click data is none, this is basically saying if you have the page when it's first loaded, right? Like, so no one's ever clicked on anything at all. So it's returning a null value. So then what we're doing over here, right? So for state, I'm putting in all of US and just getting the aggregate values for the entire data set right over here. All right, so that's if nothing's been clicked on at all. And then the idea then, if it's not none, that means someone's clicked on something. So we're grabbing the current state. Okay, and right, and so the idea then, if someone checked the cumulative value, the query is going to be select on the current state. If it was not a cumulative value, means get something on a particular day. Okay, basically here that means check for both the current state and actually the most recent date right over here. Okay, and then go ahead and then filter the data set based off of that, and then set the values right to the same thing to the state, and then the filtered data set depending on what kind of query we built right over here. Okay, and then we're just passing this into the figure right over here like that. Okay, so that's the basic logic behind it, right? So one more time, if nothing was chosen, just return all of the values for all of the US. And then if something was chosen, get the current state. And then, right, if it's cumulative, then we just want to look for the state. But if it was not cumulative, we want to get for the state and the most recent day. Okay, and then filter based off of that, and then recreate this vals for table variable right over here, plug it into the chart, and then return it. Okay, that's the basic idea behind it. If you think you just kind of you've connected to the main dots and things like that, then you should be okay. Again, there's no need to be a purist right now. And if you know one of your rows or something like that isn't exactly like mine, I don't think we should care. It's fine. All right. I can go ahead. I'll paste this in Slack if anyone wants to take a look at it. But any questions here, just with regards to how that was set up? Bueller? Okay, so I'll go ahead. So right, I'll put this in Slack if you want to go ahead and take a look at it. All right, and so we'll paste it. Okay, so if anyone wants to go ahead and take a look at it, you know, feel free to take a gander and then let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to wait a minute if you just want to go ahead and take this and then get it running on your own computer, just to make sure you're grokking it. All right. Is it okay to go on?
I think I'm okay to go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. By the way, the basic logic of callbacks is about the same. You know, you have some combination of inputs and outputs, and then you just kind of use that to sort of transform and filter your data, and then you return that in some new way. So what usually changes, right, is how you want to accept the inputs, if you want like a slider or a date, or a fill in the box. They're basically in Dash, there may be maybe a dozen different ways to accept input for different things. Obviously it's up to you how you want to transform the data. And it's generally true, right? If you have a fairly complicated dashboard, which usually ends up being the case, some of your callbacks can end up getting pretty big, and so you might have to keep track of, sometimes in the biggest case, I've actually seen over like a dozen inputs and outputs listed, for these various things. It's actually kind of common when people actually want a dashboard made. They actually have this pretty elaborate configuration in their mind, where you can kind of like add in all these different rows for tables and like turn all these little different knobs, and then kind of see what changes as a result. And so the idea then is if you kind of have like some chart which kind of allows you to adjust, 6 or 7 different settings, your callbacks can kind of get a little complicated, but that's just what the job requires, unfortunately. So, if you want to do dashboarding, that's what you got to do. But in any event, what we'll do here to finish up the class, we'll just do this together. We won't kind of do things on our own. If you go back over here, final output, right? The other thing that we have here is the sliding date range. Okay, so the idea is if you click on a particular date, okay, right now, if we don't say cumulative, right, we're just getting the most recent date. But the idea is this kind of gives us a timeline. We can go ahead and then click through if you kind of want to see how things, progress from beginning to end, which is also fairly common. This part has some additional processing, which we'll kind of go into here. What I first want us to do inside of our current chart that we have right over here, let's just add one of these things right over here, okay, like this sliding output guy that's at the very, very bottom. So let's just go ahead over here. I don't have this committed to memory yet, but it's easy enough to go ahead and find. So what we can do here, slider, okay, slider right over here. All right. And then let's just do a generic one. All right. And we'll just kind of add it in, and then we'll go ahead. You have to do some additional functions to get this to work, and those have already been pre-made. So let's do this right over here. We have our figure. So let's do this. Graph. Let's add in the slider, right? So DCC slider. We'll call it the date slider. And then we'll just add in some dummy values for now. Start, stop, 10, step. You can probably guess what this is doing, right? The slider is going to begin with the value 0. It'll stop at 10. It'll take a step size of 1. And I actually think that should just be enough. Okay, I think that'll make something render. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's rerun this. Let's get an error message because apparently stop. Okay, all right. So basically, the issue is you should not have stop right over here. It's something else. So okay, it's min and max. Sorry, min and max. All right, so let's do that instead. Min, max. And then we'll set the current value. We'll just make it 5. All right, now let's give this a shot and see how it works. Okay, now it works. Let's go over here. Let's refresh, and then we should. Okay, here we go. All right, so, right, this is. Okay, the slider right over here. The one thing we'll go ahead and then add to this are some additional labels. So let's do this. All right, I'm going to peek over here. And so let's do this, marks. I think this is going to work. List, range 0, 11. All right, I'm pretty sure this takes a list, and then we'll just do 0 through 10. I just want there to be something on the very, very bottom. Okay. All right, I think I have to restart that. But apparently that's not what you ought to do. Okay, so 1 second here. Let me just go ahead and check to see what the slider inputs. Okay, so something for marks is not working. And so it's probably going to be. Okay, all right. So it's basically a dictionary with a bunch of key value pairs right over here. Okay, all right. So what we'll do instead here, I was passing in a list for this where it's a dictionary. So what we'll do instead, we'll just do a little bit comprehension. So let's do this. All right, let me know if you need a little bit of clarification on what I'm doing here. But, right, so just the idea is I was passing a list that went from 0 to 10. Dash doesn't like that. It wants it to be in a dictionary. And so it looks like, right, this is the value. And then this is what you actually want the display to be over here, so the key values. So we're just looping through that right over here. And let's see if that works. I think it should. All right, so let's see if Dash is okay with that. And it is not. Okay, 1 second. So it's telling me invalid argument marks 0, pass into slider with ID date slider. Okay. This is also not working. Let me take a quick look. If anybody's able to get this to work correctly, feel free to go ahead and let me know. Basically, this is the corresponding value, and that's what you want the label to be. And you just want that throughout the entire thing. Let's just do something simple, okay? I don't want to burn too much time through this. Let's just... Maybe it's this. Hold on. One thing I'm going to do. So maybe it needs to be a string. That might be the case. All right. So this will be the last thing, right? The only change I'm making over here is instead of displaying a number as the value, maybe it needs something as a string instead. I think that might be what's causing it. So let me go ahead. If anything I'm doing is not clear, feel free to go ahead and let me know. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so we have this. And we have this. 1 second here. Let's give this a shot. Okay, there are no error messages up here, so that probably means it's okay. All right. And so now, all right, same thing, right? We also have our date picker, or rather our slider, but this time we have labels. Okay. And that was specified in the mark section.
So okay. Can you just show the code one more time?
Yeah, sure, no problem. It's just some basic format.
Oh, just string, I see it.
Okay, yeah. So basically, whatever you specify as the label has to be a string, apparently. Okay, so it's the same thing, right? You could basically take this, pass it as an input into a callback, and then pretty much just kind of use that to go ahead and filter something else. And that's, more or less how these things work, right? You just kind of filter data based off of some sort of input and then do some sort of computation and then spit it back out. All right. So real quickly, so for everyone here, do we have something like this at the very bottom? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. Okay. Now, if you look over here, this is maybe a little unnecessary. So if you look kind of the standard way dash displays dates, if you go over here where it says, dash core components, okay, I'll take a look. Okay. So the kind of the standard way that Dash gives you for displaying dates is date picker range, date picker single right over here. All right. And then it sort of looks like this, where you choose, from a particular date and then go from here, which to me is fine under a lot of circumstances. But for me personally, I've actually found very frequently showing dates as part of a slider actually tends to be really helpful. And so it's kind of easier to kind of construct a timeline like that's more interactive this way. All right. So there are a few functions that were written here to make sure we can actually choose dates here on the bottom. All right. Because the way here, the slider is basically designed in Dash. It only takes numbers as inputs. That's it. Okay. You can't actually feed it date time. All right. So kind of the way this works here, where you have where you can choose different dates like this, and then actually have it work right over here. Basically, the way this works is the actual value that is passed in, all right, for each of these individual marks is the actual integer value of the date. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Unix time or not, but the way a computer actually parses time is that, if you have some sort of dates, it converts it into an integer, which is the number of milliseconds since 1970. All right. And so the way any sort of programming language is able to extract like the number of dates, months, years, and so on and so forth, it just kind of calculates the number of milliseconds that particular date would have been, from the beginning of time, which is something like January 1st, 1969 or something like that. And then it kind of like transforms that into sort of like the corresponding date, month, year, and things like that. It's a little confusing, but basically any date, if you want to, can be converted back into some sort of monstrous number, which is really, really big. Okay. And then the standard is to kind of go down to millisecond time. But some library, like NumPy, actually can tell time down to the nanosecond. So if you think about a timestamp, right, in kind of like hours, weeks, months, days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, and then down to nanoseconds, things like that. So what we're going to have here, if you look at the file that was attached in Slack, all right, go ahead and download it. It's called utils. Okay, it's right over here. It has a few different functions. Okay. All right, right over here. And so some of these where it says develop tick marks, okay, and then convert to int right over here like this. Okay, these are basically ways of taking dates and turning them into numbers, and then vice versa, taking numbers and then turning them back into dates, all right? And so the idea here is we just wanted to sort of make things kosher for the actual slider. So the final version over here looks like this, okay, where we have the ID, right, is this, but the min is actually taking the minimum value for the dates and then converting that to an integer. And so we're doing this, right, for min max value. And then the marks, basically what we're doing is we are essentially grabbing. Let's just kind of take a look at how the code works and then just kind of go from there. All right. But essentially, we're just kind of doing a few helper functions just to transform dates back to numbers and then numbers back to dates. So that way it kind of conforms according to this basic thing right over here. Okay.
Can you not, just have the slider be a string, and
No,
then
no, you actually it's only numeric.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
It's a little annoying to me. I like using sliders for lots of things. And yeah, and so lots of times it's nice to have like strings and dates and stuff like that. But numbers.
Right, right. And then the only way to represent, good way to represent a date in numbers is Unix time, basically.
Yeah, basically. So you
Yeah.
convert it to some big corresponding number. So yeah,
Right.
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. So to be honest, if we want to, we can go ahead and import these things just to kind of see how they work. All right. But here, if you have the utils function, open it up.
Can you actually send the utils file again?
Yeah, where is it?
Slack.
Yeah, it should be. I'll just attach it again. Okay. Okay. And again, the details of this particular function are a little.
Did you write this?
Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah.
How long did that take?
You know, it actually took several hours. It was kind of annoying to get it to work
Yeah.
correctly. It wasn't.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah,
not like.
that-
It's one of those. It's kind of small, you know, but to kind of get it like appear like a clean date and go back and forth, you know, it's, you know, it's actually kind of annoying. So, but you know, it's actually once you have it, it's helpful. And I've actually, for some reason, I find like sliders and dates naturally go hand in hand, but that doesn't give you the chance to do it. So. All right, so I'll go ahead. For whatever it's worth, I remember when we cloned the GitHub repo, first day of the sequence, everything is right there as well. So if you want to go and get it, but there's the file. So if you want to go ahead and open it up. And again, this is not really the most important part of the project, but just if we have some decent idea of how this one works. Okay, so let me know if you're in the right spot. And again, you had to sort of jump through some hoops to kind of get this to work correctly. So we'll just kind of take a look at how it works inside the callbacks and then go from there.
Yeah, I have the file now. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Go ahead and run it. All right, and so, all right, so this thing, right? So convert to int. Let's do something like this. Import. Okay, and so, right, the quickest way to kind of get today's date in Python is something like this. And so if you do this, okay, it'll just take, you know, a date and just convert it to the corresponding, you know, millisecond value. Okay, like such. All right, and so this thing right over here where it says develop tick marks, okay, is essentially, all right, let's do something like this. Okay, and yeah, let's do this. So days, let's do 60 days. Yeah, let's actually, so let's do something there. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, who cares? All right, so offset, okay. And then let's do something like this. Let's create a variable called start. Right, so the starting date is, you know, 60 days ago. And then, okay, the end will be today's date right over here. All right, this should be good enough. So the idea then, this kind of function over here, develop tick marks, okay, we can basically here, the idea is if you wanted to, you could sort of go back any number of days or months or things like that. But let's just do this. Okay, so day, okay, and then passing the variable start, and then this is basically how many intervals you want to have in between the kind of in between your individual tick marks. Let's do this. Is equal to 3. Okay, and so what it'll do then, okay, it basically just kind of gives you the corresponding dictionary that we might have to use to pass in to this to sort of make it work, right? So this is essentially what we're doing. You were using the output of this function right over here to pass it right over here. So that way we have the corresponding integer value and then the corresponding date time right over here. Okay. So is this everyone kind of okay with how these sort of different things fit together? Just to sort of, there's nothing really, there's no like a lot of enduring value about this. It's just some wrangling we're doing to make sure everything looks correct. Okay. And you wouldn't have to do this, but you know, some things I'm a little particular about. So I like seeing it that way. All right. So are we okay so far?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, so what we'll do here, I'll just paste this in Slack, if you wouldn't mind. So you'd want to make sure, so up here, import these two functions. So assuming you have utils and demo app in the same file, all right, go ahead. To import develop tick marks. And then,
how do we know about utils? Because it's in the same folder?
Because it's in the same folder, correct.
Oh.
Yep. You could do something differently if you wanted to. Like you can do relative imports. To be honest though, imports in Python are pretty annoying. So it's a lot easier if you just have everything in the same folder.
Cool.
Okay, yeah, all right. So we'll reuse these helper functions. And so I'll go ahead. And just save these things inside the same thing that we have over here. Okay. Okay, all right. So, all right, so we have this. And so what we'll do here, I'll just paste this in the Slack channel, but because it's somewhat tedious. So essentially here, what we're doing now is we're just taking the min and the max date, converting them into integers. And then what we're doing then is we're basically saying, basically choose 30-day intervals between the most recent. So basically, we're kind of creating monthly intervals, basically, between the min and the max date to choose to use the slider. So let's do that. All right, so go ahead. And again, let's the same thing. Let's see if we can get this thing to show up. Okay, so we'll do this. And then same thing. Let's restart the app, and just to make sure we have our nice looking date slider. Okay, if it gives you a problem, I would, for the time being, just comment out a few lines from utils.py. In fact, let's just, this thing here where it says add to DB, we're going to do that later on. So, right, if you're paying attention here, I don't think these things might not be installed in the development environment. So I would just modify this a little bit. All right, because the idea is we just want to ignore this function for now. So we'll just go ahead and get rid of it entirely. And now let's try running it. All right, and so what we want over here, I'll go back to the original file if we want, but we want something a little different than what I have. All right, so someone let me know if you have it displaying. Oh, that's why. All right, because sorry, I forgot to actually. Okay, DCC slider.
I think it has to be DF instead of data.
Yeah, no, it should be DF. Thank you. DF right over here. I just had a few things. And again, you have to make a few changes to utils for it to work for now. We'll get back to that. But let's just see if we can get this to show up. Data is not defined. Right. Okay. Like Devin said, so we will write DF. DF. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is what we want. Okay, all right. And again, this is kind of a lot of cartwheels. If you wanted to, you could just kind of do the standard input, and that would work okay. It's just, for me, in a lot of use cases, I just find this to be more useful. Okay.
I can move it like halfway between months. Is that supposed to be like that?
Yeah. So the one thing you should have over here is the step.
Yeah, I've got that.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. For whatever it's worth, with the step, yeah, that should be fine for now. Don't worry about it. I think that's okay. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Basically, the step just to kind of like rounds things up to the nearest month, basically. Okay, but we should be fine. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. So what we're gonna do here, so if you look, what I want us to do over here, let's take a quick look in the same thing, if we want to use these values in the callback, okay, is we basically have to take the dates and same thing, kind of do the conversion back and forth, from numbers to dates and so on and so forth. So what I want us to do here, all right, in our inputs right over here, okay, so using a demo app file right over here, right? So we have, right, the drop-down value and then the cumulative value right over here. Okay, let's add two more things. All right, so the single date slider. And then we'll add two different inputs. All right, and so these inputs right over here, okay, right? We're going to get the current value of whatever's being selected, but also what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and also get the collection of marks as well. Okay, so remember this right over here, this is basically a dictionary with kind of all the key value pairs for the integer value and the actual date value. So let's just kind of go ahead here over here, add in the additional values for the callbacks. I'm sorry, for the actual function right over here. So we'll do this. All right, and then let's just print these off so we can see what they are, right? It's usually a good idea if you have a new input, you just want to make sure you understand what it is. All right, so let's do this. All right, let's rerun this. Okay, and on your console, you should see something sort of like this. Let me know if I'm on the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So good. Right. So the idea then, the reason why we are sort of using both of these is because the value, the actual value that's going to be passed in is going to be this big number. But then what we're going to do is we're basically going to go ahead and take this number and then look up the corresponding date with it. Everyone with me?
But can't you just convert that number yourself?
Yeah, the only thing is, for whatever it's worth, sometimes, depending on how you have dates transcribed and things like that, you can be off by a few milliseconds, and so it might not look exactly the same way. You have to be a little careful, just with just making sure these sorts of numbers right over here don't change. For whatever it's worth, I am from just getting this thing to work, Devin, it was more agreeable and less prone to error if everything was kind of captured all at the same time. So you could just have like a lookup table. Because otherwise, there were just some inconsistencies with some of these numbers, and then the corresponding date you might turn it into. And then it might not exactly match the corresponding date you have in the data set. That was the big reason why. Okay, but your basic logic is probably sound. You could take this and then convert it back to some sort of date time probably. I'm sure if you were inclined, you could go down that route and get it to work. Okay, I just remember working on this. This was kind of more straightforward, and you could just use this and then look up the corresponding date. So the idea then is when people kind of slide back and forth on the date, right, you're going to get one of these corresponding numbers. And then you could just find the corresponding date that aligns with it and then sort of look up that date inside your data set. Okay, and then same thing, you use that to go ahead and filter, and then voila. Okay, so what we'll do here, we'll just kind of add something to this to kind of, you know, implement the slider right into the one of our callbacks, and then we'll go ahead and call it an evening. All right, so let's do this. Okay, so what we have over here. Notice this right over here, so I'll do this. And then, okay, so basically we're going to get the current value of the date. Okay, and so the way we have this set up, remember, so date val is going to be an integer, but this dictionary is arranged in strings. So basically what we're going to do is, right, we say take this, you know, Unix time value, convert it to a string, and so that way there will be a corresponding key here, right, and then you have the key and then the corresponding date with it right over here like that. All right, so we have this right over here. And then the idea then here we're doing, you know, date.max. Okay, what we want to do instead, okay, is if date is equal to the current date like that. Okay, so we're not automatically just setting it to the max date, but just whatever date was selected. Okay, and I think if we're lucky, we actually should just be able to leave everything else the same. All right, and that'll go ahead and work. I have a little message right over here.
But isn't the date year, month, day? And isn't the marks just year, month?
I'm pretty sure it automatically set it to the first of the month if you don't specify. Let's just for now. No, I know what you're saying here. If that ended up needing to be changed, no, essentially here, if we do this, it's basically just kind of adjust it automatically to the first of the month. If we needed to change this, Devin, like inside the develop tick marks, we could just add in that, and that would get the exact day as well. But I'm pretty sure the way this, so you could go that, you could sort of do that if you wanted to, but I'm pretty sure the way this will work with the filtering is it essentially just kind of adjusts it to the first of the month. So it's kind of like beginning of December, beginning of January, beginning of February, March, so on and so forth. Okay, because this idea is, the basic, I mean, this is not really the only way you have to do it, but the idea is you can just kind of slide up and slide down a month at a time. Okay, but yeah, I mean, you could do it differently if you wanted to, but that's what we're doing for now. So yeah, okay, all right. So let's go ahead, same thing, close this, restart it. And again, with any little bit of luck here, we should be cooking with gas. Okay, there are no error messages up here. Okay, we kind of have this little date line right over here. Okay, and the idea is we want to uncheck the cumulative, and it should work. Okay, the only thing we might want to change, if you notice right over here, the current date does not look very good. So if we wanted to, we could probably go back over here. So the value of paragraph. Oh, sorry. Real quickly here, everyone. Notice here, the one thing we want to check over here on our application, line 62. Change that to date as well, right? Because that's why this thing was always showing February, February 23rd is over here. So let's do this. Okay. All right, let's refresh here. Let's uncheck cumulative right over here. Yeah, okay. And then this is changing to the corresponding day. It's probably not a bad idea to make the actual day itself. That might be a bit more descriptive, but that could be easily enough fixed. But now we're basically at the the basic functionality we have in this section right over here. There might be a few details that are a little bit different, but I think all the important stuff has been taken care of because we have the different inputs to the different callbacks, and then we have our chart, and we have our table, and our lovely little slider down here, and you should get the corresponding behavior. I think the only thing that might be different is in the final version. I don't even know if it's actually worth working with right now. I actually think it filters the table itself also based off the date. So I think if you wanted to kind of go full Monty, it's kind of time to wrap this up for now. But the idea is, I think if it were not cumulative, same thing. We want to go ahead and then take these values, pass them into the callback, and then instead of saying df.date.max, the date is equal to the date selected, and that would be it. So if you wanted to kind of get it to work exactly, you could do something similar here where you add these values and then get the date and then change this instead of the max date, make it the date selected, and then it would be about the same. But it's 9:26 right now. I feel like this is a good place to go ahead and stop. Yeah, and so I think in a lot of respects, this itself would kind of function as a passable dashboard. It's interactive, and you have some different charts and things going on, and you have interconnected callbacks and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think actually you could legitimately call this like a functional dashboard, and it works pretty well. But yeah, next up, we'll work on basically styling, because if you look over here, the layout here is a bit more organized. It's not just from top to bottom. So we'll take a look at styling grids and kind of use some 80-20 rules for being able to sort of add palettes and layouts to dashboards. And then after that, we'll go ahead and look at deployment, which is sort of taking these values and then doing storing them in databases, and then we'll actually start doing some maybe more proper data science and then do the actual modeling. And then for the three of us that are here, I think you're all into varying levels, kind of looking at like the hierarchical forecasting. So this would actually kind of like take that stuff almost like copy paste. And then pretty much what we'll do is we'll write a script that basically refits a model every single night and then makes predictions for all 50 states. And then we'll basically take those predictions and then store them in a database. And so that way, when you run this application, it fetches the values, the predicted values from the database for the most recent date. And that's kind of what gives you the forecast right over here. Okay, so it'll be kind of a nice way to take like the DS stuff and make it operational. Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sounds
no,
great.
it's actually fun. I actually, these things, like, it's not as like snazzy as maybe like building like sophisticated models, but actually being able to deploy stuff, and kind of getting like interconnected and functional is pretty important. So it's, we'll be standing on top of the world here in a few weeks. All right. So everyone, thanks for showing up. Same thing. I'll have kind of like this video will be posted in the Slack channel in a couple of days, and then the stitched together one will probably be together in about a week. And then I think your current schedule, I think the next one's going to be in 2 weeks from now. Yes. So in 2 Tuesdays, we'll basically just talk about how to style dashboards for people who know nothing about styling. That's basically it. And so, if you want to, there's all sorts of things. You could hire designers to kind of like turn a bunch of knobs with like CSS and the styling language of the web. But there are decent tools for being able to define layouts and styling palettes that look pretty good out of the box without having to do too much work. All right. Cool. Yeah, it'll be good.
That's good. Thanks, John.
All right.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries. Nice seeing all of you again. So, all right. So take care, everyone. Pleasure having your company tonight. And I will hopefully see you soon.